Welcome to Wild West Chronicle, your front row seat to the untamed lands where legends are born and stories of courage, betrayal, and adventure ride with the wind. From dusty trails to hidden towns, from outlaws to heroes, every tale carries the spirit of the West. Strap in, keep your eyes sharp, and let the journey unfold. Take your time to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. And don't forget, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Your engagement helps this channel grow and brings more stories to life. Let's get back to the story now. Sheriff Cade Merrick stood in the center of Ashwood's dusty Main Street, blood dripping from his knuckles, his badge catching the brutal afternoon sun like a warning. Around him, the entire town had gathered, women clutching their children, men with their hands hovering near holstered guns, everyone waiting for him to explain why Deputy Owen lay motionless in the dirt, his skull crushed by the sheriff's own revolver. But Cade said nothing. His jaw was set like iron, his gray eyes scanning the crowd with something that looked like betrayal mixed with exhaustion. The silence stretched so long that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Mayor Landis pushed the crowd, his expensive suit already covered in dust, his face purple with rage and confusion. "Cade, for God's sake, what happened here? Owen was your friend, your deputy for 6 years." Still, Cade remained silent, the blood on his hands beginning to dry in the heat. The townsfolk pressed closer, their faces transforming from shock to something darker. Suspicion, anger, fear. Martha Grimshaw, the schoolteacher who'd known Cade since he was a boy, stepped forward with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Cade, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We deserve to know why you killed him. Owen had a wife. He had children." Cade's eyes flickered toward her, and for just a moment, something painful crossed his face, a grief so deep it seemed to age him 10 years in an instant. But his lips remained pressed together, refusing to form words. Behind Martha, Owen's wife Clara collapsed to her knees, her screams piercing the tense air like bullets. 2 women rushed to hold her as she clawed at the dirt, trying to reach her husband's body. The doctor knelt beside Owen, shaking his head slowly. There was nothing to be done. The deputy was already gone. Mayor Landis grabbed Cade's shoulder, spinning him around with surprising force for a man pushing 60. "You will speak, Sheriff Merrick. This is murder in front of the entire town. You've killed a man, and you owe us an explanation." Cade met his eyes with a stare, so cold it made the mayor step back involuntarily. Without breaking his silence, Cade reached up and slowly unpinned his badge, the metal making a soft scraping sound against his leather vest. He pressed it into the mayor's trembling hand, then turned and began walking toward the jailhouse at the end of the street. Every eye followed him, every heart pounded with questions that screamed for answers. Behind him, Clara's sobs mixed with the murmur of the crowd, their voices rising in anger and confusion. "He's lost his mind," someone muttered. "Always knew he was trouble," another voice added. "Probably always been a killer," a third voice suggested, and the crowd began to nod, feeding on its own fear. As Cade reached the jailhouse steps, Samuel Royce, the town's richest rancher and most powerful voice, called out from the crowd. His words carried the weight of money and influence. "Don't let him lock himself in there. He needs to answer for what he's done." But Cade didn't pause. He opened the door to the jailhouse, stepped inside, and closed it behind him with finality that echoed through Ashwood like a gunshot. Through the window, the town could see him move to the cell at the back of the building. The same cell where he locked up countless criminals over his 8 years as sheriff. But this time, he was locking himself inside. The clang of the cell door closing was audible even outside, and the crowd erupted into chaos. People shouted over each other, demanding justice, demanding answers, demanding blood. Mayor Landis stood frozen in the center of it all, Cade's badge still warm in his palm. That night, as Ashwood settled into an uneasy darkness, lanterns burned in windows later than usual. No one could sleep. Families gathered around tables, whispering theories about what could have driven their sheriff. A man they trusted with their lives, a man who'd kept them safe from outlaws and cattle thieves and worse, to suddenly murder his own deputy in cold blood. In the general store, groups of men drank whiskey and argued about what should be done. Some wanted to storm the jailhouse and drag Cade out for a hanging. Others, remembering the times Cade had saved their children or protected their property, argued for patience. But everyone agreed on one thing. The silence was somehow worse than any explanation could have been, because silence left room for imagination, and imagination was turning their trusted sheriff into a monster right before their eyes. Inside the locked cell, Cade sat in the darkness, his head in his blood-stained hands, and for the first time in 20 years he wept. 23 years earlier, 12-year-old Cade Merrick stood at his mother's graveside in the cemetery outside Ashwood, watching strangers lower her pine coffin into the red earth. The Kansas wind howled across the open prairie, carrying with the smell of rain that wouldn't come for weeks. Cade's father, Jacob Merrick, stood beside him, not touching him, not comforting him, just standing there with his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed on something distant. The Reverend's words washed over Cade like meaningless noise. His mother had died of fever 3 days ago, burning up despite the doctor's best efforts, calling for Cade in her delirium until her voice gave out completely. In her final hour, she gripped his hand so hard her nails left crescents in his palm, and she'd whispered something he couldn't quite hear over her labored breathing. He'd leaned closer, desperate to catch her last words, but all he heard was a soft exhale, and then silence. After the funeral, Jacob loaded their few possessions into a wagon and told Cade they were leaving their small farm. "Nothing here for us now," his father said, his voice rough as gravel. "Your mama was the only thing holding me to this place." They rode into Ashwood as the sun set, painting the sky the color of old blood. The town was small then, just one main street with general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of weathered buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. Jacob rented a room above the saloon with money Cade didn't know they had. And that night, while his father drank downstairs with men whose laughter sounded cruel and sharp, Cade sat on a narrow bed and realized he hadn't spoken a single word since his mother died. Not thank you to the Reverend, not goodbye to their neighbors, not even yes or no to his father's rare questions. It was as if his voice had followed his mother into the ground. Days turned into weeks, and Cade's silence deepened. Jacob, drowning in his own grief and guilt, barely noticed. He found work as a ranch hand for Samuel Royce's father, Old Man Royce, who owned half the territory's best grazing land. Jacob would leave before dawn and return after dark, smelling of horses and whiskey, barely glancing at his son. Cade wandered Ashwood alone, a thin boy with eyes too old for his face and clothes that were starting to hang loose on his shrinking frame. The townspeople whispered about him, the mute boy, Jacob's broken son. Poor thing lost his voice when he lost his mama. Martha Grimshaw, who was young then and newly arrived to teach at Ashwood's one-room schoolhouse, found Cade sitting behind the church one afternoon, drawing pictures in the dirt with a stick. She knelt beside him, her green dress gathering dust, and didn't ask him to speak. Instead, she sat with him in comfortable silence, and when she finally stood to leave, She squeezed his shoulder gently. "Silence isn't weakness," she said. "Sometimes it's the only honest thing left." Cade started attending Martha's school, though he never answered questions or participated in recitations. He learned to write instead, filling slate after slate with words he couldn't or wouldn't say aloud. Martha discovered he was brilliant, devouring books faster than she could provide them, understanding mathematics and history and literature with a depth that startled her. But he remained silent, communicating only through written notes when absolutely necessary. The other children mocked him at first, calling him names, shoving him during recess. But Cade never fought back, never cried, never reacted. His silence became a kind of armor, impenetrable and mysterious. By the time he turned 13, most of the children had stopped bothering him. A few even found themselves drawn to his quiet presence, sitting near him during lunch, sharing their secrets with him because he never repeated anything. How could he? His father remained distant, a ghost of the man he'd been before his wife's death. Everything changed the summer Cade turned 14. Samuel Royce, then a boy of 16 and already cruel as his father was rich, cornered a younger girl named Elizabeth behind the general store. Cade happened to be there, returning books to Martha, when he heard the girl's frightened protests. He rounded the corner to find Samuel with his hand clamped over Elizabeth's mouth, his other hand tearing at her dress. Something inside Cade shattered. He didn't think, he just moved. His fist connected with Samuel's jaw with surprising force, and when the older boy stumbled back in shock, Cade hit him again and again and again. Blood poured from Samuel's nose and mouth. But Cade didn't stop until Elizabeth's screams finally broke through his rage. He looked down at his bloodied knuckles, then at Samuel writhing in the dirt, then at Elizabeth running toward the street. Samuel's father found them minutes later, and his fury was biblical. But Elizabeth had already told her father what happened, and her father had already gathered witnesses. The truth was undeniable. Samuel Royce, son of the richest man in the territory, had been stopped from something terrible by a silent, motherless boy. And Cade Merrick, who hadn't spoken in 2 years, had finally found his voice through his fists, a pattern that would shape the rest of his life. The aftermath of the fight rippled through Ashwood like stones thrown in still water. Old man Royce, furious at his son's humiliation but unable to deny the truth of what Samuel had attempted, paid Elizabeth's father a substantial sum to keep the matter quiet. The money was presented as compensation for distress, but everyone understood it was really payment for silence. Elizabeth's family took the money. They were poor, struggling farmers who needed it desperately, but the shame of accepting blood money hung over them like a curse. Cade watched it all happen from the edges of town, his hands still bruised and swollen from the beating he delivered. He'd expected punishment, perhaps even jail time despite being the one who'd stopped a crime. But instead, something stranger happened. People started looking at him differently. Men nodded to him on the street. Women smiled at him in the general store. He'd become someone who acted when others only watched. But Cade still didn't speak. The violence hadn't unlocked his voice the way some townspeople whispered it might. If anything, his silence deepened, became more purposeful. Martha noticed a change in him during their afternoon reading sessions at the schoolhouse. "You're not broken anymore," she observed one day, her fingers tracing the spine of a book about law and justice. "You're choosing silence now. There's a difference." Cade met her eyes and nodded slowly. She was right. The silence that had begun as grief had transformed into something else, a weapon, a shield, a way of seeing the world without the distraction of his own voice cluttering his thoughts. People revealed so much when they were trying to fill silence. They confessed, they lied, They showed their true selves when given enough quiet space. Cade was learning to read people the way he read books, and he was discovering that most folks were like stories, full of hidden motives and unspoken truths. Samuel Royce, however, didn't learn humility from his beating. Instead, he learned to hate. He couldn't touch Cade directly. Too many people had witnessed what happened, and even his father's money couldn't erase that truth. But he could make life difficult for Cade's father, Jacob, who worked on the Royce ranch. Small humiliations began. Jacob was given the worst jobs, the most dangerous assignments, the longest hours. When he complained, he was reminded that work was scarce and he was lucky to have any employment at all. Jacob, already broken by grief and drowning in whiskey most nights, bent under the pressure. He became a shadow, coming home later and later, speaking less and less, until father and son were both trapped in separate silences. One evening, when Cade was 15, Jacob didn't come home at all. The next morning, someone found him at the bottom of a ravine on Roy's property, his neck broken, his horse grazing calmly nearby. Accident. Old man Royce declared. Tragic accident. But the way Samuel smiled at the funeral told Cade everything he needed to know. After his father's death, Cade found himself truly alone. He was too young to work most jobs, too silent to convince anyone to take a chance on him. He spent nights sleeping in the church, days doing odd jobs for pennies. Martha helped when she could, feeding him meals, giving him work cleaning the schoolhouse, but she was living on a teacher's meager salary and couldn't do much more. It was during this desperate time that Sheriff Marcus Thorne found Cade splitting with behind the church one afternoon. Thorne was an older man, maybe 50, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much violence. He'd been Ashwood sheriff for 12 years, and he had a reputation for being fair, but hard as iron. "Boy," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his badge, "I've been watching you since you beat sense into young Royce. You got a quiet strength about you, and God knows this town could use more of that." Cade stopped mid-swing, the axe heavy in his hands, and waited. Thorne continued, "I need a deputy, someone I can trust, someone who knows how to see and hear without needing to run his mouth all the time. You interested?" Cade stared at the sheriff for a long moment, his mind racing. He was 15, nearly 16, too young for such work by any reasonable standard. But these were frontier times, and Ashwood was desperate for law enforcement. The territory was crawling with cattle thieves, claim jumpers, and worse. Thorne was getting older, slower, and he needed help. Cade set down the axe and pulled a small piece of paper from his pocket. He always carried paper and a pencil stub now. He wrote quickly, "I don't speak." Thorne read it and laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a hill. "Son, I don't need a talker. I need someone who can stand beside me when things get ugly and not run away. I need someone who can look a man in the eye and not blink. I need someone who knows that sometimes silence says more than 1,000 words ever could." He extended his hand. "You learn the law. You learn to shoot straight. You learn to be fair even when it's hard. You do that, and I'll teach you everything else." Cade looked at that outstretched hand, calloused, scarred, honest, and for the first time since his mother died, he felt something like hope. He shook Thorne's hand, and although he didn't speak a word, his eyes made a promise that he would spend the next 8 years keeping. Sheriff Marcus Thorne's training was brutal and unforgiving. He woke Cade before dawn every morning, putting a gun in his hand and teaching him to shoot at targets set up in the desert outside town. Speed means nothing if you can't hit what you're aiming at. Thorne would say, his voice carrying across the empty land as Cade squeezed the trigger again and again, his ears ringing, his hands cramping. And hitting your target means nothing if you shoot the wrong person. The hard part of this job isn't the shooting, boy. It's knowing when to shoot and when to holster your weapon and walk away. Cade absorbed everything like dry, earth-absorbing rain. He learned to read weather patterns in the dust, to track men across rocky terrain where most folks saw nothing, to smell whiskey on a man's breath from 10 feet away. But most importantly, he learned to listen, truly listen, to the silence between words, the pauses in testimony, the moments when people's stories didn't quite match their eyes. By the time Cade turned 17, he could outdraw half the gunfighters in the territory and outthink the other half. His silence had become legendary in its own way. Criminals would confess to him just to fill the uncomfortable void of his stare. Witnesses would reveal details they'd never share with Thorne, because something about Cade's quiet attention made them feel heard in a way that words never could. Thorne watched his young deputy with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're getting good at this, maybe too good," he said one evening as they sat outside the jailhouse, watching the sun paint the sky purple and gold. "But I worry about you, Cade. A man needs more than a badge and a gun. He needs friends, family, someone to remind him he's human." Cade pulled out his notebook and wrote, "I have you." Thorne read it and shook his head, his expression sad. "I'm an old man with a bad heart and too many regrets. You need better than me." But Cade didn't want better. He had Martha, who still met him weekly to discuss books and philosophy, treating him like the intelligent person he was rather than the mute curiosity most folks saw. He had Sheriff Thorne, who taught him not just about law enforcement but about morality, justice, and the complicated space between them. And he had his work, cleaning up Ashwood, making it safer, creating order from chaos. When he turned 19, a gang of raiders attacked a homestead 15 miles outside town, killing a family and stealing their livestock. Thorne and Cade tracked them for 3 days across unforgiving terrain, sleeping in shifts, eating cold beans from cans. When they finally cornered the gang in a box canyon, Thorne gave Cade a choice. "We can wait for them to surrender, or we can go in shooting. What do you think?" Cade looked at the canyon, calculating angles and risks, then wrote in his notebook, "They murdered children. They won't surrender. And we can't let them escape." The gunfight lasted less than 5 minutes, but felt like hours. Cade took 2 bullets. One grazed his shoulder, another buried itself in his thigh. But he didn't make a sound, didn't cry out, didn't hesitate. He moved with a cold efficiency that terrified even Thorne, dropping 3 raiders before the others threw down their weapons and begged for mercy. Cade, bleeding and steady, kept his gun trained on them while Thorne bound their hands. On the ride back to Ashwood, with the surviving raiders tied to their horses and Cade's wounds roughly bandaged, Thorne spoke quietly. "You scare me back there, son. Not because of what you did. You did what needed doing, but because of how you did it. No emotion, no hesitation, just cold calculation. That's useful in this work, but it's also dangerous. Don't let this job turn you into stone." Cade wrote with difficulty, his hands shaking from blood loss. "Better stone than dead." Thorne read it inside, recognizing a truth he couldn't argue with. When they returned to Ashwood, the town erupted in celebration. The murdered family had been beloved, and their killer's capture brought a sense of justice that Ashwood desperately needed. Mayor Landis, younger then and still idealistic, stood on the steps of the general store and gave a speech about law and order, about the brave men who protected them. Cade, pale from blood loss and pain, stood beside Thorne and said nothing, as always. But the townspeople cheered for him anyway. And for the first time in his life, Cade felt like he belonged somewhere. That night, while the town doctor stitched his wounds and scolded him for not complaining about the pain, Martha sat beside him and held his hand. "You're becoming someone important to this town," she said softly. "But don't forget to be someone important to yourself, too." Cade squeezed her hand in response, unable to write with his injuries, and she understood. She always understood. Outside, Ashwood celebrated its heroes, unaware that in 7 years, one of those heroes would stand in its dusty street with blood on his hands, choosing silence once again. But this time, the cost would be infinitely higher. 3 years later, Sheriff Marcus Thorne died exactly how he'd always said he would, with his boots on and his gun in his hand. It happened on a Tuesday morning in early September, when the heat was just beginning to break, and the first whispers of autumn touched the Kansas air. A group of outlaws had robbed a bank in Riverdale, a larger town 40 miles east, and they were riding hard toward Ashwood with a posse on their trail. Thorne received word by telegraph just after dawn. 6 men, heavily armed, likely to pass through Ashwood territory by midday. He woke Cade, who was now 22 and had lived above the jailhouse for the past 3 years, and together they prepared for a confrontation. "We'll set up at Widow's Ridge," Thorne decided, referencing a narrow pass 2 miles outside town. "Funnel them through, give them a chance to surrender. If they don't, we end it there." Cade nodded, checking his revolvers with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, positioning themselves on opposite sides of the ridge with clear sight lines down the pass. The morning stretched long and tense, both men silent in their separate vigils. Around noon, Cade heard them. The thunder of hooves, the jangle of stolen money in saddlebags, the rough laughter of men who thought they'd gotten away with something. Thorne stood up from his position, his badge catching the sunlight, his voice carrying across the canyon. "This is Sheriff Marcus Thorne of Ashwood. Throw down your weapons and dismount. You're surrounded." The outlaws reined in their horses, dust swirling around them like a living thing. Their leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, scanned the ridge and saw only Thorne standing there, exposed and alone. He smiled, and in that smile, Cade saw death coming. "You're too old for this, Sheriff," the outlaw called back. "And you're all alone. Ride away and we'll let you live." Thorne's response was to cock his rifle. "Last chance, boys." What happened next took maybe 30 seconds, but carved itself into Cade's memory forever. The outlaws drew first, 6 guns firing at once, the sound exploding across the canyon like thunder. Thorne got off 2 shots. Cade saw one outlaw fall from his horse, another grab his shoulder, before bullets tore through the sheriff's chest. He fell backward, his rifle clattering on the rocks, his body sliding down the ridge in a horrible, ungraceful tumble. Cade didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't feel. He simply acted. His guns were in his hands before Thorne hit the ground, and he moved down the ridge like death itself, firing with precision that was almost supernatural. 2 more outlaws fell dead before they even knew where the shots came from. A third took a bullet through his gun hand and screamed, dropping his weapon. The remaining 2 tried to run, spurring their horses back the way they'd come, but Cade's bullets found them anyway. One to the back, the other through the head. In less than a minute, all 6 outlaws lay dead or dying in the dust of Widow's Ridge. Cade reached Thorne as the old sheriff was drawing his last breaths, blood bubbling from his lips, staining his silver beard red. His eyes found Cade's face, and somehow impossibly he smiled. "Good shooting, son," he whispered, each word a struggle. Cade dropped to his knees beside him, his own hands shaking now, his gun forgotten in the dirt. He wanted to speak, wanted to tell Thorn that he loved him like a father, wanted to thank him for everything, wanted to beg him not to die. But the words wouldn't come. They never came. Instead, he gripped Thorn's hand, and the old sheriff gripped back with surprising strength. "You'll be sheriff now." Thorn managed, blood flowing faster now. "You'll keep them safe. You're ready." Cade shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face, but Thorn squeezed his hand harder. "You are. You always were. Just remember." He coughed and more blood came. "Justice and mercy both matter. Don't forget mercy." His eyes began to glaze over, and with his last breath he whispered, "Proud of you, son." Then Marcus Thorn, the best lawman Ashwood had ever known, died in the dust of a canyon with his deputy's hand in his. Cade sat there for a long time, holding that cooling hand, feeling something inside himself break and reform into something harder, colder, more permanent. When he finally stood, he gathered Thorn's body and tied it across the sheriff's horse. He loaded the outlaws' bodies onto their own horses, all 6 of them, and led the grim procession back to Ashwood. The town came out to meet him, expecting triumph, expecting victory. Instead, they saw their sheriff dead and a young man with a face like carved stone leading him home. Mayor Landis wept openly. Martha collapsed against the schoolhouse wall, her hand over her mouth. The doctor confirmed what everyone could see. Thorn was gone. That evening, as the sun set over Ashwood in shades of blood and fire, the town council held an emergency meeting. They emerged an hour later with a decision. Cade Merrick, despite his youth and his silence, would become sheriff. He'd proven himself 100 times over, and Thorn himself had been training him for this role. When they offered him the badge, Cade stared at it for a long moment. Tarnished silver, worn smooth by Thorn's years of wearing it, still carrying drops of the old sheriff's blood. He took it with steady hands, pinned it to his vest, and walked back to the jailhouse alone. He didn't celebrate. He didn't feel victorious. He felt only the weight of responsibility and the cold certainty that silence would now be his closest companion for the rest of his life. The town of Ashwood learned quickly that their new sheriff was nothing like Marcus Thorn. Where Thorn had been talkative, personable, known for sitting on his porch and chatting with townsfolk about weather and crops and gossip, Cade remained locked in his chosen silence. He communicated through written notes when absolutely necessary, through gestures when possible, and through the cold authority of his presence when words weren't needed at all. Within his first month as sheriff, he'd broken up 3 bar fights without saying a word, just walking in, staring down combatants, and waiting until they shamefully shuffled apart. He arrested a cattle thief by tracking him 40 miles into rough country, appearing in the man's camp at dawn with his gun drawn and his face impassive, and marching him back to jail without a single word exchanged. The thief later told folks that the silence was worse than any threat Cade could have made. But Cade's silence created problems too. When disputes arose between townspeople, they wanted a sheriff who would listen to their grievances, who would offer wisdom or at least sympathy. Instead, they got Cade, who would listen intently, his gray eyes never leaving their faces, but who would only write brief, factual responses. Both of you were wrong. Make it right or face consequences. No elaboration, no comfort, no taking sides. Some folks appreciated the brutal honesty and fairness. Others found it cold, inhuman even. "He's not a man," someone grumbled in the saloon one night. "He's a machine wearing a badge." Martha defended him when she heard such talk, but even she worried. She'd visit him weekly at the jailhouse, bringing food and books, trying to draw him out. "You need to let people see more of you," she'd say gently. "They trust you to keep them safe, but they don't know you. That distance frightens them." Cade would write in response, "Safety doesn't require them to know me, just to trust I'll do my job." His first real test came 9 months into his tenure, when Samuel Royce, now 29, and even more arrogant than he'd been as a teenager, rode into town with 6 ranch hands and proceeded to tear up the saloon in a drunken rage. The damage was extensive. Broken mirrors, shattered bottles, a bartender with a split lip, 2 patrons beaten unconscious. When Cade arrived, Samuel was standing in the center of the destruction, laughing, his expensive boots crunching on broken glass. The moment he saw Cade, his laughter died. 8 years had passed since their first violent encounter, but the hatred between them remained fresh as an open wound. Well, Samuel slurred, swaying slightly. "The mute sheriff. Come to arrest me, Cade? You and what words?" His men laughed nervously, but Cade's expression didn't change. He simply unholstered his gun and pointed it at Samuel's chest. The laughter stopped immediately. "You wouldn't shoot me," Samuel said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "My father owns half this territory. You'd hang." Cade didn't shoot. Instead, he moved forward with startling speed, bringing the butt of his gun down on Samuel's wrist with a crack that echoed through the sudden silence. Samuel screamed, his expensive gun clattering to the floor, his wrist already swelling. Before any of the ranch hands could react, Cade had his gun pressed under Samuel's chin, his other hand twisted in the man's collar. He marched Samuel out of the saloon and down the street toward the jailhouse, Samuel stumbling and cursing, his men following at a cautious distance. The entire town watched from windows and doorways as their silent sheriff manhandled the richest family's son like a common criminal. When they reached the jail, Cade threw Samuel into the cell so hard he bounced off the back wall. Then Cade wrote a single word on a piece of paper and held it up for Samuel to see. Consequences. He locked the cell and walked out, leaving Samuel to rage and threaten and eventually weep when he realized no one was coming to immediately save him. Old man Royce arrived within hours, of course, bringing his lawyer and enough bluster to fill the jailhouse twice over. But Cade had documented everything. Witness statements, property damage assessments, medical reports on the injured men. He presented it all silently, methodically, like a prosecutor building a case. The lawyer reviewed the evidence and quietly advised Royce that his son was clearly guilty. "He'll pay for the damages," Royce finally said through gritted teeth. "And any medical bills. Just let him out." Cade wrote, 3 days in jail. Then he pays. Then he's released. The law applies to everyone. Royce's face turned purple with rage. "You're making an enemy of the wrong family, Sheriff." Cade met his eyes and wrote one more line. "I made an enemy of your family when I was 14. This changes nothing." The truth of those words hung in the air like smoke. After a long, tense moment, Royce nodded stiffly and left, taking his lawyer with him. Samuel spent 3 days in that cell, and when he was finally released, something had shifted in Ashwood. The townspeople walked a little taller, spoke a little louder. Their silent sheriff had just proven that he enforced the law without fear or favor, and that gave them a pride they hadn't felt in years. But that pride came at a cost Cade couldn't yet see. Samuel Royce, humiliated twice now by the same man, nurtured his hatred like a careful gardener tending poison flowers. And in the dark spaces where hatred grows, plans began to form. Plans that would take years to bear their terrible fruit, Plans that would eventually force Cade to choose between his silence and everything he held dear. For now, though, Ashwood prospered under its silent sheriff's watch. Crime dropped. Disputes were settled fairly. The vulnerable were protected. And Cade Merrick, who hadn't spoken a word in 11 years, became the most trusted man in town, a trust that would one day demand the highest price imaginable. Owen Blackwell came to Ashwood on a Wednesday afternoon in spring, when Cade had been sheriff for just over 2 years. He rode in on a chestnut mare, his saddlebags worn but well-maintained, his clothes dusty from travel but clearly of good quality. He was 26, handsome in an easy way that made people immediately comfortable, with warm brown eyes and a smile that seemed permanently affixed to his face. He found Cade sitting outside the jailhouse, cleaning his guns in the afternoon sun, and dismounted with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he'd never met a stranger who didn't become a friend. "Sheriff Merrick?" he asked, extending his hand. "Name's Owen Blackwell. I heard you might be looking for a deputy." Cade looked up from his gun cleaning, studied the man for a long moment, then went back to his work without shaking the offered hand. Owen's smile didn't falter. "Right, of course. You don't talk. I heard about that too." He pulled up a chair uninvited and sat down. "Here's the thing, Sheriff. I've been a deputy in 3 towns over the past 5 years. Got recommendations from all of them. I'm good at dealing with people, which I'm guessing might be something you could use help with. No offense intended." Cade set down the gun he'd been cleaning and pulled out his notebook. He wrote, "Why here? Why now?" Owen read it, and his smile took on a more genuine quality. "Honest answer? I heard Ashwood was growing. Railroads coming through in a few years, which means prosperity, which means trouble. I want to be somewhere I can make a difference before things get chaotic. Plus, I heard you put Samuel Royce in jail, and anyone who has the backbone to do that is someone I want to work with." He paused, then added, "Also heard you tracked 6 killers alone after Sheriff Thorne died, and brought them all in. That's the kind of lawman I want to learn from." There was something genuine in Owen's voice that made Cade pause. He studied the man's eyes, looking for deception, finding only earnestness and perhaps a hint of something deeper, ambition, maybe, but not the cruel kind. After a moment, he wrote, 3-month trial. Prove yourself. If you lie to me once, you're gone." Owen extended his hand again. "Deal, Sheriff." This time, Cade shook it. Owen Blackwell proved himself quickly and thoroughly. He was everything Cade wasn't: talkative, charming, able to defuse tense situations with humor and empathy. Where Cade's silence made some townspeople uncomfortable, Owen filled those silences with easy conversation that put folks at ease. They made an effective team. Cade as a watchful, implacable enforcer of justice, Owen as the friendly face who explained Cade's decisions and smoothed over the rough edges. Within weeks, Owen had befriended half the town. He attended church socials, helped elderly women carry groceries, played cards with the ranchers in the saloon. He laughed often and loudly, slapped backs, remembered names and family details. He's exactly what this town needed, Martha told Cade one evening. Someone to balance your silence with words. Cade wrote in response, "He's good at his job." But Martha saw something in Cade's expression. Not quite approval, but maybe the beginning of trust. The 3 months passed, and Cade officially made Owen his deputy. They fell into a comfortable rhythm. Morning patrols, alternating night watches, weekly rides out to check on the scattered homesteads around Ashwood. Owen proved himself in a gunfight, too, when claimed jumpers attacked a family's land. He was fast, accurate, and most importantly, he didn't freeze when bullets started flying. Afterward, As they were tying up the surviving jumpers, Owen looked at Cade and said, "You know, Sheriff, I've worked with a lot of lawmen. Most of them were either too soft or too hard. But you're something different. You're fair, but you're not weak. You're hard when you need to be, but you're not cruel. That's rare. That's worth something." Cade simply nodded, but inside, something shifted. For the first time since Thorne died, he felt like he might not have to carry the weight of protecting Ashwood entirely alone. As months turned into years, Owen became more than a deputy. He became something close to a friend, though Cade would never have written that word. Owen married a local girl, Clara, a pretty blonde who worked at the general store. Their wedding was a social event of the year, and Cade stood up as Owen's best man, uncomfortable in his formal clothes but present nonetheless. When Owen's first child was born, a daughter they named Rose, Cade visited the hospital and held a tiny, screaming infant with surprising gentleness. Owen watched with tears in his eyes. "You should have a family too, Cade," he said softly. "You'd be a good father." Cade handed back the baby and wrote, "This job doesn't leave room for that." But Owen shook his head. "That's what you tell yourself. But the truth is you're scared. You're scared that if you let people in, you'll lose them like you lost your parents, like you lost Thorne." But Cade, living in fear isn't living at all. Cade left without responding, but Owen's words followed him like ghosts. Because the terrible truth was that Owen was right. Cade was afraid, and that fear, combined with his silence, would become the prison that trapped him when the worst finally came. 6 years into their partnership, Cade began to notice small inconsistencies. Nothing obvious, nothing he could point to with certainty, just a feeling like a splinter under the skin. Money from fines sometimes didn't match the amounts collected. Evidence from arrests occasionally disappeared from the jailhouse. Prisoners would sometimes mention conversations they'd had with Deputy Blackwell that Owen never reported. Cade started paying closer attention, watching his deputy with the same careful scrutiny he used on criminals. Owen, for his part, remained his usual cheerful self, helpful, friendly, devoted to his growing family. He now had 3 children, and Clara was pregnant with their 4th. He worked hard, showed up on time, and seemed genuinely committed to keeping Ashwood safe. But the inconsistencies continued, small drops of wrongness accumulating into a puddle Cade couldn't ignore. One night, Cade followed Owen after their shift ended. He'd told himself he was being paranoid, that 6 years of trust couldn't be dismissed over minor discrepancies. But something in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through countless dangerous situations, told him to look deeper. Owen didn't go home to Clara and the children. Instead, he rode out to a small line shack on the edge of Samuel Royce's property, a place that should have been empty. Cade circled around, approaching on foot through the darkness, and what he saw through the shack's grimy window made his blood run cold. Owen sat at a rough table with Samuel Royce, money spread between them like a poisonous feast. Samuel was talking, gesturing with the casual authority of someone giving orders, and Owen was nodding, counting cash, looking nothing like the honest deputy Cade thought he knew. Cade couldn't hear their words, but he didn't need to. The scene told him everything. Owen was on Royce's payroll, had been, probably for some time. Cade's first instinct was to kick down the door and confront them both. His hand actually touched his gun before cold reason stopped him. He needed to know more. How deep did this corruption go? What exactly were they planning? One reckless moment of confrontation might destroy his only chance to understand the full scope of the betrayal. So instead, Cade retreated into the darkness, mounted his horse, and rode back to town with a heart full of something worse than anger. Disappointment mixed with a grief that felt eerily similar to watching Thorne die. He'd been alone for so long, and then Owen had appeared like an answer to a prayer Cade hadn't known he was praying. And now that answer revealed itself as a lie, a carefully constructed deception that had taken 6 years to fully see. That night, lying awake in his room above the jailhouse, Cade began to plan. He would watch. He would document. He would gather evidence until there was no denying the truth. And then he would do what justice demanded, no matter what it cost him. For 3 months, Cade became a ghost in his own town. He followed Owen on his secret meetings with Samuel Royce. He discovered ledgers hidden in Owen's home, carefully noting payoffs and payments. He found evidence of prisoners being released early in exchange for bribes, of crimes being overlooked when the criminals paid enough, of justice being sold to the highest bidder. Samuel Royce, still nursing his decade-old hatred of Cade, had found the perfect weapon. Corrupt the sheriff's deputy, undermine the law from the inside, and wait for the right moment to bring Cade down completely. Owen, for all his smiles and friendliness, had been playing both sides from the beginning, serving as deputy while secretly working to dismantle everything Cade had built. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. Every laugh they'd shared, every danger they'd faced together, every moment of apparent friendship, all of it had been theater, performance, a long con that Cade had been too trusting, too lonely, too desperate for connection to see. The worst discovery came on a cold October evening. Cade found evidence that Owen had been involved in his father Jacob's death 8 years earlier, not directly, but as Samuel's eyes and ears even back then. Owen had been in town during that time, working odd jobs, watching and reporting to Samuel. The accident that killed Jacob had been carefully arranged, and young Owen Blackwell, barely 19 then, had helped make sure no one looked too closely at the circumstances. Cade stood in his jailhouse, holding that evidence, a letter in Owen's handwriting describing Jacob's movements, his drinking patterns, the best time to stage an accident, and felt something inside himself die. The silence that had defined him for so long deepened into something oceanic, a void so complete that even his own thoughts seemed to echo in it. Owen had helped kill his father. Owen, who held Cade's goddaughter at her baptism. Owen, who called him friend. The betrayal was so profound, so total, that Cade almost couldn't process it. Almost. But in the end, he processed it the only way he knew how, by planning exactly how to bring Owen to justice, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. The morning Cade decided to act started like any other. He woke before dawn, performed his usual routine, checked his guns, reviewed his notes, watched the sun break over Ashwood's roof lines. Owen arrived at the jailhouse around 7, his usual cheerful self, carrying coffee and breakfast rolls from a bakery. "Morning, Sheriff," he said with his trademark smile. "Clara sends regards. She's asking if you'll come for dinner this Sunday. The kids miss their Uncle Cade." Cade took the offered coffee, his face revealing nothing, and wrote his response. "I'll be there." Owen beamed, completely unaware that Cade had spent the previous night finalizing a case against him that was now ironclad, undeniable, devastating. They went about their morning patrol together, Owen chattering about town gossip, about his children's antics, about the railroad that was finally, actually coming to Ashwood next year. Going to change everything, Owen said as they walked past the general store. Town will double in size, maybe triple. Lot of opportunity coming our way, Sheriff. Lot of money to be made. The casual way he said that last part, money to be made Cade's stomach turn. Around noon, a rider came in reporting trouble at the Hannigan farm. rustlers, possibly armed. It was the kind of call they responded to dozens of times together. They rode out, side by side, through autumn landscape painted in shades of gold and rust. The farm was 15 miles out, and Owen filled the ride with his usual easy conversation. But then, about 2 miles from the Hannigan place, Owen reined in his horse abruptly. When Cade turned back to look at him, Owen's expression had changed completely. The smile was gone. His eyes were cold, calculating, nothing like the warm brown Cade had learned to trust. "There's no trouble at the Hannigan farm," Owen said quietly. Samuel set up the call. "This is where it ends, Cade." He drew his gun with practiced speed. "I'm sorry. I really am. But you've always been too stubborn, too incorruptible. You're bad for business." Everything slowed down in the way it always did. When violence arrived, Cade saw Owen's finger tightening on the trigger, saw the regret and determination warring in his deputy's eyes, saw the end of 6 years of partnership in a single moment of betrayal. But Cade had spent the last 3 months expecting exactly this. He'd seen the trap forming, had known Owen and Samuel would eventually move against him directly. He rolled sideways off his horse as Owen fired, the bullet whipping through the space where Cade's head had been a fraction of a second earlier. He hit the ground hard, his own gun already in his hand, and fired twice before Owen could adjust. Both bullets found their mark, one in Owen's shooting arm, the other in his shoulder. Owen screamed and dropped his weapon, nearly falling from his horse. Cade was on his feet instantly, his gun trained on the deputy who just tried to murder him. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the dust and distance. 6 years of history hanging between them like a poisonous fog. Owen, bleeding and in pain, looked at Cade with something that might have been genuine sorrow. "You were supposed to miss that first shot," he gasped. "That was the plan. I fire, you miss. Samuel's men hiding in the rocks pick you off. Nice and clean, but of course you saw it coming. You always see everything, don't you?" Cade didn't respond. How could he? He simply kept his gun steady and gestured for Owen to dismount. Owen half fell from his horse, his injuries making movement difficult. "What now?" he asked, his voice tight with pain. "You arrest me? I'll talk, Cade. I'll tell them everything about Samuel, about the corruption, about all of it. We can still salvage something from this. We can still." Cade pulled out the folder he'd been carrying in his saddlebag, all the evidence he'd gathered over 3 months. He threw it at Owen's feet. Owen looked down, his face going pale as he recognized his own handwriting, his own ledgers, his own betrayals laid out in undeniable black and white. "You already know," Owen whispered. "You've known for a while, but you didn't arrest me. Why? Why wait?" Cade wrote quickly, his hand surprisingly steady. "Needed to know how deep it went. Needed ironclad proof. Needed to protect this town from you and Royce both." Owen read it and laughed bitterly. "You were always playing a long game. I should have known. I should have been more careful." He looked up, blood soaking through his shirt now. What happens now? What happened next was Samuel, Royce, and 4 of his ranch hands emerging from behind the rocks, exactly where Owen had implied they'd be hiding. They had their guns drawn, and Samuel's face was split in a triumphant grin. Well, the incorruptible Sheriff Merrick. Looks like you finally got outplayed." Cade's gun swung toward them, but the math was clear. 5 armed men versus 1. Even if that one was Cade Merrick, meant certain death if he started shooting. "Put the gun down, Sheriff," Samuel said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You've lost. Owen here is going to tell everyone you tried to kill him. We got witnesses. Us will say you went crazy, Attacked your own deputy out of nowhere. The town will turn on you, strip you of that badge, probably hang you. And with you gone, we can finally run this town the way it should be run, profitably. Owen was staring at Cade with an expression of horror mixed with resignation. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said quietly. I never wanted you dead. I wanted to provide for my family, to give them security. Samuel offered money I couldn't refuse, but I never wanted this. Samuel sneered at his paid informant. Shut up, Owen. You're a coward who sold out his partner. Don't pretend you had noble motives. The moment hung there, suspended in autumn sunlight, 5 men waiting for Cade to make his choice. Cade looked at Owen, bleeding, frightened, consumed by the choices that had brought him to this moment. He looked at Samuel Royce, triumphant, cruel, finally about to get his revenge for humiliation spanning 17 years. He thought about justice and mercy, about Thorne's dying words, about the promise he'd made to protect Ashwood at any cost. And then Cade did something that shocked everyone. He holstered his gun. He walked over to Owen, pulled the bleeding man to his feet, despite his protests, and stood between him and Samuel's men. Then he pulled out his notebook and wrote something, holding it up for everyone to see. You want him, you go through me. He's my deputy. He's my responsibility. And I'm taking him back to stand trial. Samuel laughed. You're insane. We outnumber you. We outgun you. And you're going to die protecting the man who betrayed you. Cade wrote again, yes. Because in that moment, standing in the dust with betrayal behind him and murder ahead of him, Cade Merrick made his choice. Not the choice of silence, not the choice of violence, but the choice of law, of principle, of being the man Marcus Thorne had trained him to be, even if it killed him. Samuel Royce stared at Cade's written word, yes, and his smile slowly faded. Something in Cade's stance, in the absolutely unwavering certainty radiating from him, made Samuel pause. You're bluffing, Samuel said, but his voice had lost its confidence. You wouldn't throw your life away for a traitor. Cade didn't move, didn't blink. He simply stood there between Owen and the 5 guns pointed at them both, his silence more eloquent than any speech could have been. Behind him, Owen made a choking sound that might have been a sob. Cade, don't, he whispered. Just let them shoot me. I deserve it. You don't have to die for someone like me. Cade wrote again without turning around. Shut up. I'm not dying for you. I'm dying for the law. He held up the paper for Samuel to see. The law says you get a trial. Even traitors. Even you. Samuel's face twisted with rage and frustration. Fine, he spat. Have it your way. Kill them both. His men raised their rifles, and Cade's hand dropped to his gun, ready to make his last stand. But before anyone could fire, a voice rang out across the canyon. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Samuel. Everyone froze. From the opposite ridge, Martha Grimshaw stood with a rifle in her hands, flanked by a dozen townspeople, all armed, all with their weapons trained on Samuel's men. Mayor Landis was there, the bartender, the doctor, the blacksmith, even old Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house. Martha's voice carried clear and strong. We followed you, Sheriff Merrick. After you've been acting strange for months, I started paying attention. I saw you following Owen, saw you gathering evidence, and I realized something was happening that the town needed to know about. So when you two rode out today, I organized some concerned citizens to follow at a distance. Good thing we did. She lowered her rifle slightly, though it remained pointed at Samuel. Now here's what's going to happen. Sheriff Merrick is going to take his deputy back to town. Owen's going to stand trial for whatever crimes he's committed. And you, Samuel, are going to let them go. Because if you don't, I've got 12 witnesses here who will testify that you tried to murder a lawman. Even your father's money can't buy you out of that. Samuel's face went through a series of expressions: rage, calculation, fear, and finally, bitter resignation. He gestured sharply to his men. "Lower your guns." They obeyed reluctantly. Samuel glared at Cade with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Sheriff. Not by a long shot." Cade wrote one more note and held it up. "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." He helped Owen onto his horse, mounted his own, and together they rode back toward Ashwood with Martha and the townspeople forming a protective escort around them. The ride was long and silent, except for Owen's occasional gasps of pain from his wounds. As they approached town, Owen finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you save me? After everything I've done, after I tried to kill you, why?" Cade didn't write anything for a long time. Then, as they reached the edge of town, he pulled out his notebook and showed Owen a single sentence. "Because Thorne taught me that justice and mercy both matter. I haven't forgotten." The town erupted when they arrived. Word had already spread. Somehow it always did in small towns, that something dramatic had happened. People lined the streets as Cade and his escort rode in, questions flying from every direction. Cade ignored them all, focusing on one task: getting Owen to the doctor and then into a cell. The doctor worked on Owen's wounds while Cade stood guard, his presence ensuring no mob would form, no vigilante justice would be served. When Owen was patched up and locked in the cell, Cade finally addressed a crowd that had gathered outside the jailhouse. He wrote on a large piece of paper and held it up to the window where everyone could see. "Deputy Blackwell is under arrest for corruption, bribery, and attempted murder. He will stand trial. The evidence will be presented. Justice will be served. That's all." The crowd murmured, some angry, some confused, some simply shocked. Martha stepped forward and spoke on Cade's behalf, explaining what she'd witnessed, confirming the corruption, but also emphasizing that Cade had risked his life to bring Owen in for proper trial rather than executing him in the field. That night, as Ashwood buzzed with rumors and speculation, Cade sat in his office reviewing the evidence against Owen. The case was strong, too strong to fight. Owen would go to prison for years, maybe decades. His children would grow up with a convicted criminal for a father. Clara would be left to raise 4 children alone, bearing the shame of her husband's crimes. The thought brought Cade no satisfaction. He'd done what the law required, what justice demanded. But mercy, Thorne's other lesson, felt absent from this victory. Around midnight, Cade walked back to the cells where Owen lay on a narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. "I'm sorry," Owen said when he saw Cade. "Those are just words. I know they don't mean anything now, but I need to say them anyway. I was weak. Samuel offered money when Claire was pregnant with our first, when we were broke and desperate, and I took it. Then I took more. Then I couldn't stop. I told myself I was just supplementing our income, that I was still doing the job, that it didn't really matter. But it did matter. It matters. And I'm sorry." Cade stood there for a long moment, then wrote, "Your children will visit you in prison. I'll make sure of it. And when you get out, if you get out, this town might give you a second chance. But only if you accept full responsibility. No excuses, no justifications." Owen nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I promise I will." Cade turned to leave, but Owen called out one more time, "You're a better man than I ever was, Cade. Than I ever could be. I hope you know that." Cade didn't respond. He simply walked back to his office, extinguished the lamps, and sat in the darkness, feeling the weight of justice and mercy pressing down on him like physical things, wondering if he'd truly honored both or if he'd simply found a new way to fail. Owen Blackwell's trial began 3 weeks later in Ashwood's makeshift courthouse, really just a town hall with benches brought in and a judge imported from the territorial capital. The entire town packed inside, standing room only, with people pressed shoulder to shoulder in the autumn heat. Judge Cornelius Harding was a severe man in his 60s, known for being fair but harsh, someone who didn't suffer fools or corruption. He took one look at the crowd, at the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm, and banged his gavel hard enough to crack the wood beneath it. "This will be conducted with order and dignity," he announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Any outbursts and you'll be removed. This is a court of law, not a circus." Cade sat at the prosecutor's table. Ashwood had no official prosecutor, so the duty fell to him as sheriff. Across the aisle, Owen sat with a lawyer his father-in-law had hired, though everyone knew the case was hopeless. The evidence Cade had compiled was devastating, methodical, irrefutable. The first day of testimony was brutal. Cade presented ledgers showing years of bribes taken, prisoners released for payment, crimes overlooked in exchange for Royce money. He presented witnesses, people who'd paid Owen to look the other way, criminals who testified about the corrupt bargains they'd struck. Each piece of evidence was like a nail being driven into Owen's coffin. The courtroom reacted with gasps, angry mutters, and occasional shouts at Judge Harding's silence with his gavel. Clara sat in the front row, pale as death, her 4 children. Beside her, the youngest, only 8 months old, sleeping in her arms. Every time a new piece of evidence was revealed, she flinched as though physically struck. Martha sat with her, providing what comfort she could, but there was no comfort to be found in this situation. Owen's betrayal hadn't just hurt Cade. It had wounded the entire town's sense of trust and safety. People who thought they lived under honest law enforcement now realized they'd been living under a lie for 6 years. On the second day, Cade presented the evidence that made even Judge Harding's stern face register shock. Owen's involvement in Jacob Merrick's death 8 years earlier. The letter in Owen's handwriting, detailing Jacob's movements and vulnerabilities, was read aloud. The courtroom went silent. People who'd known Jacob, who'd drunk with him, worked with him, mourned him, now understood that his death hadn't been an accident at all. It had been murder, carefully orchestrated, with young Owen Blackwell as Samuel Royce's accomplice. Clara's sobs echoed in the terrible silence. Owen, for his part, sat with his head in his hands, not even trying to maintain innocence anymore. When Judge Harding asked if he had anything to say about this evidence, Owen simply whispered, "It's all true, every word." The judge's expression hardened even further. "You helped murder a man. An innocent man whose only crime was being in Samuel Royce's way. Do you understand the gravity of that?" Owen nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I was 19. I was stupid and greedy, and thought I could get away with anything. I've lived with that guilt every day since." The defense tried to mount some kind of case, arguing that Owen had been manipulated by Samuel Royce, that he'd been young and desperate, that he'd done good work as deputy despite his corruption. But it rang hollow against the mountain of evidence. On the third day, Samuel Royce himself was called to testify. He arrived in an expensive suit, radiating arrogance, and took the stand with a smirk that made several jury members visibly angry. Cade's questioning was conducted entirely through written notes that the judge read aloud, which gave the proceedings a strange, stilted quality. But the questions were precise, damning, revealing Samuel's role in corrupting Owen, in orchestrating Jacob's death, in attempting to undermine Ashwood's law enforcement. Samuel denied everything, of course, claiming Owen was lying to reduce his own sentence, claiming he was being persecuted because of an adolescent fight 17 years ago. But his denial sounded weak even to his own ears. The jury saw through him. The whole town saw through him. And when Samuel stepped down from the stand, Cade held his gaze with such cold intensity that Samuel actually faltered, missing a step, his arrogance cracking just slightly. The verdict came on the fourth day. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a rancher named Thomas who'd known both Cade and Owen for years, stood with visible reluctance. We find the defendant, Owen Blackwell, guilty on all counts: corruption, bribery, accessory to murder, and attempted murder of a peace officer. Clara's wail cut through the courtroom. Her children began crying, not fully understanding but sensing their mother's devastation. Judge Harding banged his gavel for silence, then turned his harsh gaze on Owen. "Stand up, Mr. Blackwell." Owen stood on shaking legs. "You betrayed every oath you took, corrupted the office you held, and participated in murder. You have destroyed your family's honor and this town's trust. I sentence you to 25 years of hard labor in the territorial prison. You'll be eligible for parole after 15 years if you demonstrate genuine rehabilitation. Do you have anything to say?" Owen looked at Cade, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "To you, to this town, to my family. I'm so sorry." Cade stood, walked to the defense table, and wrote one final note. He handed it to Owen, who read it and collapsed back into his chair, sobbing. The note said simply, "Your children will know you tried to make it right. I'll make sure they know." As the marshal led Owen away in chains, Clara ran to him, the children trailing behind, and they embraced desperately while the courtroom watched in silence. Justice had been served, but nobody felt victorious. They all just felt broken. After Owen's conviction, Ashwood settled into an uneasy peace. Clara and her children moved away to live with her sister in Colorado, unable to bear the shame and whispers. Martha organized a collection to help with their expenses, and the town contributed generously. Most people understood that Clara and the children were victims too. Cade visited them before they left, bringing small gift for each child and a letter for Clara promising that he'd keep watch over Owen in prison and ensure he was treated fairly. Clara read the letter and wept, thanking Cade for his mercy even when he had every right to be merciless. "You're a good man, Sheriff Merrick," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I hope someday you find a peace you deserve." Cade simply nodded, watching as a wagon carried him away, taking with him the remnants of his one attempt at friendship. The loneliness that followed was like a physical weight, pressing down on him with renewed force. Samuel Royce, meanwhile, had walked away from the trial legally unscathed. The evidence against Owen was undeniable, but proving Samuel's direct involvement was harder. He'd been careful, using intermediaries, avoiding written records, always maintaining plausible deniability. Cade knew Samuel was guilty, knew it in his bones, but knowing and proving were different things. Still, the trial had damaged Samuel's reputation. People looked at him differently now, spoke to him with barely concealed contempt. His business suffered as ranchers and merchants found reasons to work with competitors. His father, Old Man Royce, who'd always protected his son, died that winter, leaving Samuel in charge of a vast empire that was slowly crumbling around him. And Samuel blamed all of it on Cade. The hatred that had simmered for 17 years now boiled over into something consuming, obsessive, dangerous. Samuel began planning his revenge with the same careful patience that Cade had used to build his case. Against Owen, he would destroy the silent sheriff, but not quickly, slowly, methodically, completely. The attack started small. A fire at a homestead under Cade's protection. Arson clearly, but no evidence pointed to anyone specific. Cattle rustling that increased dramatically, stretching Cade thin as he tried to patrol too much territory alone. New deputies were hard to find. Word had spread about Owen's betrayal, and few men wanted to risk working alongside Ashwood's cursed sheriff. Cade worked 18-hour days, riding circuit after circuit, barely sleeping, existing on coffee and determination. Martha watched him wearing himself down and tried to intervene. "You need help, Cade," she said one evening, bringing him dinner at the jailhouse. "You can't protect this entire territory by yourself." Cade wrote, "I have to. No one else will take the job." Martha shook her head sadly. "That's not sustainable. You're going to break, and when you do, Samuel wins. That's what he's counting on." Cade knew she was right, but knowing didn't change the reality. He was alone, besieged, and losing ground every day. Then the whispers started. Anonymous letters appeared around town, suggesting that maybe Cade had planted evidence against Owen. Maybe the silent sheriff wasn't as honest as everyone thought. Maybe his refusal to speak hid darker secrets. The letters were carefully crafted to plant doubt, without making specific accusations. Samuel had learned from his mistakes at the trial. Most townspeople dismissed the letters as obvious attempts to discredit Cade, but some began to wonder. After all, a man who never speaks, who keeps everything locked inside, what else might he be hiding? The doubt spread like a slow poison, not enough to turn the town against him, but enough to erode the absolute trust he'd once enjoyed. Cade felt it in small ways. People avoiding eye contact, conversations stopping when he entered rooms, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. He responded by working harder, being more visible, solving every crime with even more determination. But the harder he worked, the more isolated he became. It was a trap, and he could feel its jaws closing slowly around him. 6 months after Owen's trial, Samuel made his first direct move. He paid a group of outlaws, violent men with nothing to lose, to stage a robbery in Ashwood during the town's harvest festival, when the streets would be crowded with families and children. The plan was simple. Create chaos. Draw Cade into a situation where he'd have to shoot with civilians nearby, and hopefully, he'd make a mistake that would cost innocent lives. Then Samuel could finally turn the town completely against him. The outlaws rode in on a Saturday afternoon in late September, when the festival was at its peak. They opened fire on the bank, killing the guard, sending people screaming and running in all directions. Cade was at the other end of town when he heard the shots, and he ran toward the chaos with his heart pounding. What he found was his worst nightmare. Armed men holding hostages in the bank, children crying in the street, parents frantically searching for their families, blood staining the dust. The outlaws saw him coming and opened fire, not caring who else was in their line of fire. A bullet struck Martha, who'd been helping organize the festival. She went down hard, blood spreading across her dress, and Cade's world narrowed to a single point of rage and purpose. He moved through the chaos like a force of nature, returning fire with deadly precision, shepherding civilians to safety. His silence now a terrifying thing that preceded him like a reputation made solid. In 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours, he killed 3 outlaws, wounded 2 more, and drove the rest into a siege situation in the bank. But the damage was done. 2 civilians were dead, 5 wounded including Martha, and the town's sense of safety had been shattered. As Cade knelt beside Martha while the doctor worked frantically to save her life, he knew that Samuel had just won a significant victory. The town he'd sworn protect now felt like a war zone, and he was a general who'd failed to prevent the battle. Martha survived the shooting, but barely. The bullet had punctured her lung, and for 3 days she hovered between life and death while the town held its collective breath. Cade never left the doctor's office. Sitting in the hallway outside her room, his guns laid across his lap, looking like some kind of vengeful guardian spirit. People brought him food and coffee, but he barely touched either. He just sat there, silent as always, but now his silence felt different, heavier, darker, filled with a guilt that everyone could see but no one could address. When Martha finally woke on the 4th day, weak and pale but alive, the first thing she asked for was Cade. The doctor let him in, and Cade approached her bed like a man approaching his own execution. He knelt beside her, and before he could pull out his notebook, Martha grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "Don't you dare apologize," she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube. "I know that look, Cade Merrick. This wasn't your fault." Cade pulled his hand away and wrote quickly, "You were shot because of me, because Samuel is targeting me and doesn't care who gets hurt. This is exactly what I feared." Martha read it and shook her head weakly. "No, I was shot because evil men chose to shoot innocent people. You didn't pull that trigger. You didn't plan this attack. Samuel Royce did. And if you start taking responsibility for his evil, you're letting him win." She paused, coughing, and Cade reached for water to help her drink. After she'd recovered, she continued, "I've known you since you were 12 years old. I've watched you grow from a silent, broken boy into a man of principle and courage. You protected this town for 8 years, asking nothing in return. You've been fair and just and merciful even when mercy was hard. Don't let Samuel destroy that. Don't let him make you doubt who you are." Cade wrote, "People died because I couldn't stop them. Children saw things no child should see. You almost died." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Life is risk, Cade. Living in a world with evil people means sometimes evil touches us. But you can't prevent every tragedy. You can only stand against evil when it comes. And you did. You saved dozens of lives yesterday. Focus on that." But Cade couldn't focus on that. He could only focus on the 2 bodies being buried in Ashwood Cemetery, on the children who'd lost a parent, on the blood that stained the street and would take weeks to fully wash away. He spent the next month barely speaking even in writing, communicating only what was absolutely necessary. He hired 2 temporary deputies, drifters, really men with gun experience but little else, to help patrol while he investigated the attack. The investigation led exactly where he knew it would, to Samuel Royce. The outlaws who survived confirmed that Samuel had hired them, paid them handsomely to attack during the festival. But again, Samuel had been careful. He'd used intermediaries. The outlaws had never actually met him, couldn't identify him, could only provide hearsay that wouldn't hold up in court. Cade brought the evidence to Judge Harding, who'd stayed in Ashwood after Owen's trial to help establish a more formal court system. The judge reviewed everything and shook his head grimly. "It's not enough, Sheriff. I believe you, and I believe Samuel is behind this. But belief isn't evidence. We need something concrete, something that directly ties him to the attack. Without that, we can't touch him." Cade left the judge's temporary office, feeling something close to despair. Every time he got close to Samuel, the man slipped away like smoke. And every time Samuel escaped justice, more people got hurt. That evening, as the sun set blood red over Ashwood, Cade made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. He would stop playing by rules that Samuel didn't follow. He would start planning not for arrest and trial, but for permanent removal of a threat the law couldn't touch. It was a line he'd never crossed, a line Marcus Thorne had warned him never to cross. The moment you become an executioner instead of a lawman, Thorne had said years ago, is the moment you lose your soul. But Cade couldn't see any other option. Samuel was destroying Ashwood piece by piece, and the law was powerless to stop him. So Cade began planning something he'd never imagined himself capable of. Cold-blooded, premeditated revenge dressed up as justice. He told himself he was protecting the town. He told himself he had no choice. But deep down, in the parts of himself he didn't want to examine, he knew the truth. He wanted Samuel dead, not for justice, for vengeance. Martha, recovering slowly but steadily, sensed a change in him. 2 weeks after the shooting, she was well enough to return to teaching, though she moved carefully and tired easily. She invited Cade to dinner one evening, and over a simple meal, she studied him with the same perceptive eyes that had seen through him when he was 12. "You're planning something," she said quietly. "Something that goes against everything Marcus taught you." Cade started to write a denial, but Martha held up her hand. "Don't lie to me, Cade. I know you too well. You're thinking about killing Samuel Royce outside the law, aren't you?" The silence stretched long. Finally, Cade wrote, "He can't be touched by the law. He'll keep hurting people until someone stops him permanently." Martha nodded slowly. "Maybe so, but if you cross that line, you become what you spent your life fighting against. You become a killer who decides who lives and dies based on his own judgment. That's not justice, Cade. That's tyranny." Cade wrote furiously. "Then what should I do? Watch him destroy everything? Wait for him to kill more innocent people?" Martha reached across the table and took his hand. "You should remember that mercy matters as much as justice." Those were Thorne's words, and they're the only thing standing between you and damnation. Don't forget them now, when they matter most. Cade pulled his hand away, unable to meet her eyes, because he'd already decided the line was going to be crossed, and he'd live with the consequences, whatever they might be. Cade spent 3 weeks preparing. He learned Samuel's routines, his travel patterns, the routes he took between his ranch and town. He identified a perfect location, a narrow canyon where Samuel often rode alone, checking on his cattle. The plan was simple. Ambush, a single shot, make it look like an accident or maybe just an unsolved murder. No witnesses, no evidence. Just Samuel Royce finally removed from Ashwood forever. Cade told himself this was necessary, that he was protecting the town, that sometimes justice required dirty hands. But every night, as he lay awake in his room above the jailhouse, he heard Marcus Thorne's voice warning him about becoming the thing he fought. He heard his mother's dying breath, reminding him of loss. He heard the echo of his own silence, which had started as grief and grown into armor, now threatening to become a tomb. But he pushed those doubts down and focused on a plan. Samuel had to die. There was no other way. The day came, a cold morning in late October, when frost covered the ground and breath hung visible in the air. Cade rode out before dawn, positioning himself in the rocks overlooking the canyon. He waited for hours, his rifle loaded and ready, his heart beating steady as a drum. Around noon, he heard hoofbeats. Samuel appeared, riding alone as expected, completely unaware that death waited above him. Cade sighted down his rifle, his finger on the trigger, Samuel's head perfectly centered in his sights. All he had to do was squeeze. One small movement, and it would be over, But as his finger tightened, something stopped him. Not conscience, not mercy. He'd hardened himself against both. What stopped him was a sound. A child's laughter, faint but clear, carried on the wind. Cade's head snapped up, and he saw what he'd missed in his obsessive focus on Samuel. Riding 50 yards behind Samuel, hidden by a bend in the trail, were his 2 young sons, racing to catch up to their father on some kind of family outing. If Cade took the shot, they would see it. They would watch their father die. They would carry that trauma forever, just as Cade carried the trauma of his mother's death, his father's murder. In that frozen moment, with his fingers still on the trigger and time seeming to stop, Cade saw the future that his choice would create. He saw those boys growing up haunted, becoming men consumed by revenge, continuing the cycle of violence that had poisoned this territory for too long. He saw himself transform from protector to monster, his badge meaningless. Everything Marcus Thorne had taught him wasted. And most devastatingly, he saw that Martha had been right. Crossing this line wouldn't save Ashwood. It would corrupt it from within. Because once people knew their sheriff was willing to murder in cold blood, what was to stop him from deciding anyone else deserved to die? The rifle lowered slowly, and Cade sat back against the rocks, his hands shaking with the enormity of what he'd almost done. Below him, Samuel rode on, oblivious to how close he'd come to death. His sons caught up to him, and Cade heard Samuel laugh at something one of them said, heard the sound of father enjoying time with his children. Samuel was evil. Cade didn't doubt that, but he was also human, also someone's father, also part of the complicated web of life that Cade had no right to sever based solely on his own judgment. Cade stayed in those rocks long after Samuel and his sons had passed, watching the sun move across the sky, feeling something inside himself crack and then slowly begin to heal. He'd come within a finger's pressure of becoming a murderer, and the realization of how close he'd come filled him with a shame deeper than anything he'd felt before. When he finally rode back to Ashwood as darkness fell, he went straight to Martha's house. She opened the door, took one look at his face, and knew. "You didn't do it," she said, not a question but a statement. Cade shook his head, then wrote in his notebook, "I wanted to. I was ready to." His children saved him without knowing it. Martha pulled him inside, made him sit down, and poured him coffee he didn't drink. "This is the most important moment of your life, Cade," she said seriously. "Not the moment you stopped yourself from pulling the trigger. The moment you decide what to do next. You can let this near mistake eat at you, make you bitter and hard, or you can let it teach you something about mercy and the value of restraint." Cade wrote, "I don't know how to stop him legally. I've tried everything." Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would change everything. "Maybe you're thinking about this wrong. You've been trying to stop Samuel as a lawman, playing by rules he doesn't follow. But there's another way. Politics, public opinion, the court of community judgment. Samuel's power comes from money and fear. What if we took away his ability to use both? What if we organized a town against him, made him a pariah, drove his business into ground through sheer collective will? It would take time, but it would be legal, moral, and permanent." Cade stared at her, his mind racing. It was so simple, he couldn't believe he'd missed it. Samuel's greatest fear wasn't death or jail. It was becoming irrelevant, powerless, watched by a community that refused to be intimidated anymore. "You'd need allies," Martha continued. "The mayor, the business owners, the ranchers. You'd need to build a coalition that would stand together and refuse to give Samuel any more power over this town. Can you do that? Can you trust people again after what Owen did?" Cade thought about it for a long time, then wrote, "I don't know, but I'm willing to try. because the alternative is becoming what I hate. Martha smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since she'd been shot. Then let's start tomorrow. Let's save this town the right way. And for the first time in months, Cade felt something like hope. The morning after his failed assassination attempt, Cade began the hardest work he'd ever undertaken, asking for help. He started with Mayor Landis, showing up at his office with a written proposal outlining his plan to systematically isolate Samuel Royce through economic and social pressure. The mayor read it, looked at Cade with surprise and then growing excitement. "This is brilliant, Sheriff. Organize the business owners to refuse Royce contracts. Get the ranchers to boycott his sales. Make him persona non grata in every social setting. It won't be fast, but it will be effective." He paused, studying Cade. "But I have to ask, why now? You've been fighting Samuel for months with traditional law enforcement. What changed?" Cade wrote simply, "I almost became something worse than him. Someone reminded me there's a better way." The mayor nodded slowly, understanding more than Cade had written. "All right then, let's build this coalition. I'm in." By the end of that day, the mayor had contacted 15 influential townspeople, inviting them to a secret meeting at the church that evening. The meeting was tense at first. People were afraid. Samuel's reach was long, and his capacity for revenge well established. But Martha, recovered enough to be formidable again, stood up and delivered a speech that silenced every doubt. "We've been afraid for too long," she said, her voice ringing through the church. "We've watched Samuel Royce poison this town for years, and we've told ourselves there was nothing we could do. But that's a lie. We are this town. We decide who has power here, not him. Sheriff Merrick has spent 8 years protecting us, asking nothing in return, standing alone against every threat. Now it's our turn to stand with him. Now it's our turn to say, no more. We will not do business with Samuel Royce. We will not socialize with him. We will not give him the respectability that money can't buy. And if he retaliates, we will stand together against that too. Because we are Ashwood and we bow to no one." The church erupted in applause, and one by one, people stood up to pledge their support. The blacksmith, the doctor, the bartender, the largest independent ranchers. Even some of Samuel's former business partners, tired of his manipulation and cruelty. Over the next 6 months, the boycott took hold with surprising effectiveness. Ranchers refused to sell cattle through Samuel's auction house, instead organizing their own cooperative. Merchants stopped carrying goods from Royce-owned suppliers, finding alternatives even when it cost them more. At social gatherings, Samuel and anyone who associated with him were treated with cold politeness at best, outright hostility at worst. The town that had once feared him now simply excluded him, and there was nothing he could do about it. He tried intimidation, sending his ranch hands to threaten business owners. But Cade was always there, appearing like a ghost whenever trouble started, his silent presence and drawn gun more effective than any speech could be. Samuel tried bribery, offering better prices, better terms. But the town held firm, united in a way it had never been before. He tried lawsuits, claiming unfair business practices. But Judge Harding, now permanently stationed in Ashwood, dismissed them, noting that people had every right to choose who they did business with. Samuel was losing, and he knew it. His empire began to crumble. Cade watched it happen with mixed feelings. He wanted justice, and in a way, he was getting it. Samuel was being destroyed systematically, legally, by the very community he'd tried to control. But there was no satisfaction in it, only a tired sense of necessity. He continued his work as sheriff, training 2 new deputies who'd arrived seeking honest work under an honest lawman. They were young, earnest, and reminded Cade painfully of who Owen had been at first. He trained them carefully, watching for signs of corruption, teaching them not just law enforcement but ethics, restraint, the balance between justice and mercy. They looked up to him with something approaching worship, which made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to be anyone's hero. He just wanted to do his job and keep people safe. Martha, fully recovered now, teased him about his discomfort. You become a legend, Cade. The silent sheriff who can't be bought, can't be intimidated, who chose principle over revenge. People will tell stories about you for generations. Cade wrote, I don't want stories. I want peace. Martha laughed. Too late for that. You're stuck being inspiring, whether you like it or not. By the spring of the following year, Samuel Royce was effectively broken. His ranch was hemorrhaging money, his workers leaving for better employers, his house falling into disrepair because no one would sell him supplies at reasonable prices. He rode into town less and less, and when he did, he looked older, thinner, consumed by the hatred that had poisoned his entire life. Cade almost felt sorry for him. Almost, but then he'd remember Jacob's body at the bottom of that ravine, remember the festival shooting, remember all the ways Samuel had hurt innocent people in his quest for power and revenge. The town began to relax, sensing that the long battle was finally ending. Businesses thrived without Samuel's manipulation. Families felt safe again. The railroad was coming in 6 months, bringing prosperity that would change Ashwood forever. Everything seemed to be working out exactly as it should. But Cade couldn't shake a feeling of unease, a sense that Samuel wouldn't go down without one final, devastating strike. He increased patrols, varied his routines, watched for signs of trouble. And he was right to worry, because Samuel Royce, trapped in his failing empire with nothing left but hatred, was planning something terrible. Something that would force Cade to make an impossible choice and break his silence in a way that would echo through Ashwood forever. The storm was coming. Cade could feel it in his bones. He just didn't know what form it would take until it was almost too late. The warning came from an unexpected source. One of Samuel's former ranch hands, a man named Dutch who quit after seeing one too many of his employer's cruelties, rode into town on a lather horse and went straight to the jailhouse. He found Cade and his 2 deputies, young men named Finn and Garrett, preparing for morning patrol. Dutch's face was pale, his hands shaking as he dismounted. He spoke rapidly to the deputies while Cade listened. Royce has lost his mind. I heard him last night, talking to himself in the main house. He's planning something for the schoolhouse. Something about making the sheriff watch children die. About finally breaking the man who can't be broken. I don't know exactly what he's planning, but it's happening today. You need to get those kids out of there. Cade's blood ran cold. He grabbed Dutch by the shoulders, forcing the man to meet his eyes, then gestured urgently for him to repeat everything slower, with more details. Dutch, understanding the silent command, took a deep breath and continued. He mentioned fire and explosives. He's been stockpiling dynamite from the old mining operation. Sheriff, I think he's going to blow up the school with the children inside. Cade didn't wait to hear more. He was already moving, running toward the schoolhouse with a speed that belied his usual careful control. His deputies followed, shouting questions, but Cade had no time to write answers. The schoolhouse was on the far end of town, a 10-minute walk, a 5-minute run. Cade covered the distance in what felt like seconds, his heart hammering, his mind racing through scenarios. Martha would be there, teaching. 23 children would be there, ranging from 6 to 14 years old. If Samuel had rigged explosives, if Cade was too late, he couldn't finish that thought. He burst through the schoolhouse door just as Martha was beginning the day's lessons. Every head turned toward him, children's faces showing surprise at the sheriff's dramatic entrance. Martha stood from her desk, concern immediately flooding her features. "Cade? What's wrong?" But Cade wasn't looking at her. He was scanning the room, the walls, the corners, looking for anything out of place. And then he saw it, a bundle of dynamite sticks wired to a timer mechanism, hidden behind the wood stove, counting down. For minutes remaining, everything slowed down. Cade pointed at the device, and Martha's face went white. She immediately began ushering children out, keeping her voice calm despite her terror. "Everyone outside, quickly now. We're having an unexpected fire drill. Form a line, hold hands, walk quickly." The children, sensing something was wrong but trusting their teacher, obeyed. Cade's deputies arrived and helped, carrying the youngest children, making sure no one was left behind. Within 90 seconds, the schoolhouse was empty except for Cade and the bomb. 3 minutes left. He approached it carefully, examining the mechanism. It was crude but effective. A timer connected to enough dynamite to level the building and kill anyone inside. The timer was ticking down remorselessly. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Cade's hands, so steady when shooting, trembled slightly as he examined the wires. He'd seen explosives before, had even defused simple devices. But this one was different, more complex, with wires that seemed deliberately tangled to confuse anyone attempting disarmament. 2 minutes. Outside, he could hear Martha organizing the children, keeping them back, her voice strained but controlled. He could hear his deputies calling for help, townspeople gathering. But inside the schoolhouse, there was only the terrible ticking of the timer and Cade's own breathing. 1 minute, 30 seconds. Cade made a decision. He couldn't defuse it. The mechanism was too complex, too deliberately sabotaged. But he could move it carefully, moving with agonizing slowness. He lifted the bundle of dynamite. The device was heavy, unstable, and the wires connecting the timer to the charges shifted with every movement. One wrong jostle, and it would detonate immediately. 1 minute. Cade carried it toward the door, each step measure controlled. His entire world narrowed to the explosive in his hands, and the countdown in his peripheral vision. 45 seconds. He made it outside, and the crowd gasped, people screaming at him to throw it, to get rid of it. But there was nowhere to throw it where it wouldn't hurt someone. The town was too densely packed, too many people, too many buildings. 30 seconds. Cade did the only thing he could think of. He ran toward the edge of town, toward the open desert, carrying death in his arms like some kind of terrible offering. 20 seconds. His legs pumped, his lungs burned, and behind him he could hear people shouting his name, Martha's voice above all others, screaming for him to drop it and run. 15 seconds. He was past the last buildings now, in open ground but still too close to town. 10 seconds. He pushed harder, every muscle screaming. 5 seconds. He threw the bundle as far as his strength, allowed, and dove to the ground, covering his head with his arms. 3 seconds. 2. 1. The explosion was massive. A thunderclap that shook the earth and threw dirt and rocks hundreds of feet into the air. The shockwave hit Cade like a physical wall, lifting him and slamming him back down. His ears rang, his vision blurred, and for several seconds he couldn't move, couldn't think, could only lie there gasping. When his senses finally returned, he pushed himself up slowly, checking for injuries. Cuts and bruises, Nothing serious. He'd been far enough away. The town had been spared. The children were safe. He turned to look back at Ashwood and saw the entire population standing in shocked silence, staring at him. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the whole town erupted in cheers and applause. People rushed toward him, Martha leading the charge, tears streaming down her face. She reached him first and threw her arms around him despite his protests, holding him tight. "You saved them," she sobbed. "You saved all of them. You magnificent, stubborn, silent fool." Behind her, parents clutched their children. Everyone crying, laughing, and trying to process what had just happened. Cade's deputies arrived, checking him over, their faces showing a mixture of awe and relief. But Cade wasn't celebrating. He pulled away from Martha and gestured urgently for his deputies. He wrote quickly in his notebook. "Samuel did this. He tried to murder children to get to me. We end this now." Finn, the younger deputy, looked uncertain. "Sheriff, we don't have proof it was Royce. Dutch's testimony might not." Cade cut him off with a sharp gesture and wrote again, his handwriting harsh and angry. "I know it was him, and he's not done. He's escalated to attacking children. If we don't stop him now, he'll try again. Someone will die." Garrett, the older deputy, nodded grimly. "What do you want to do, Sheriff?" Cade wrote his answer and showed it to them both. "We ride to Royce's ranch. We arrest him. Today. Now." The deputies exchanged glances, seeing something in Cade they'd never seen before, a cold fury that promised no mercy, no hesitation, no second chances. They nodded and went to prepare horses and gather what remained of the town's able-bodied men who could ride with them. Within 30 minutes, a posse of 15 men was assembled, armed and ready. Martha approached Cade one last time before he mounted his horse. "Be careful," she said, "and remember what I told you about mercy." Cade met her eyes and wrote one final note. "Mercy for those who deserve it, justice for those who don't." Then he rode out with his posse, leaving Martha standing in the street with worry etched across her face. The ride to Royce's ranch took 2 hours. The ranch was a sprawling operation, weakened by the boycott, but still substantial, with a main house and several outbuildings surrounded by thousands of acres of grazing land. As they approached, Cade signaled for the posse to spread out and surround the property. He, along with Finn and Garrett, rode straight up to the main house. The place looked abandoned, windows dark, no smoke from the chimneys, an air of desolation hanging over everything. Cade dismounted and approached the front door cautiously, his gun drawn. He kicked the door open and entered, his deputies flanking him. The house was a wreck inside. Furniture overturned, bottles everywhere, the smell of decay and desperation thick in the air. They searched room by room, finding nothing but evidence of Samuel's decline. Unpaid bills, angry letters from creditors, empty whiskey bottles by the dozens, but no Samuel. In what had once been a study, Cade found something that made his blood run cold. A detailed map of Ashwood with multiple locations marked in red. The schoolhouse, the church, the general store, the jailhouse itself. Beside each marking were notes about quantities of explosives needed, optimal timing for maximum casualties, plans for attacks that would have killed dozens. Samuel hadn't just been planning to bomb the school. That was only the beginning. He'd been planning to destroy the entire town. Cade showed the map to his deputies, and the color drained from their faces. "My God," Finn whispered. "He's completely insane." "Where is he?" They continued searching, eventually finding a note on the kitchen table, written in Samuel's shaky handwriting. To Sheriff Cade Merrick, you've taken everything from me. My reputation, my business, my future. You've made me nothing in this town I once controlled. But I took something from you too, Sheriff. By now, you found the schoolhouse empty. Realize you saved those children from an explosion that would have broken you forever. But you're too late to save the next target. While you're reading this, I'm already in position. And this time I won't miss. The note was signed with Samuel's name and dated that morning. Cade crushed the paper in his fist, his mind racing. If Samuel wasn't here, where was he? What was his next target? Then it hit him like a physical blow. The church. It was Sunday tomorrow, when the whole town would gather for services. But Samuel might not wait. He might be there now, rigging more explosives, planning something even worse. Cade was running before his conscious mind fully processed a thought, his deputies scrambling to follow, the posse mounting up in confusion as their silent sheriff tore past them, riding hell-bent for Ashwood with murder in his eyes and prayer in his heart that he wouldn't be too late. They rode back to Ashwood fast and safety allowed, horses lathered and breathing hard. As they crested the final hill overlooking town, Cade saw smoke rising from the direction of the church. Not thick black smoke of a full fire, but thin gray tendrils that suggested something smoldering. He urged his horse faster, arriving at the church to find townspeople gathered at a safe distance, pointing and shouting. Inside the church, visible through the open doors, Samuel Roy stood at the altar with enough dynamite strapped to his chest to obliterate the entire building. He looked like a scarecrow, thin, wild-eyed, his clothes hanging loose, his face unshaven and haggard. In his hand, he held a dead man switch, a simple device that would detonate the explosives the moment he released it. "Stay back!" he screamed as Cade dismounted. "All of you stay back, or I'll blow this whole place to hell." The crowd backed up immediately, parents pulling children behind them, everyone terrified. Cade's deputies arrived seconds later, immediately assessing the situation. "Sheriff, we can't rush him," Garrett said quietly. "If he lets go of that switch, he's dead and the church is destroyed." Cade knew that. He also knew something else. Samuel wanted him specifically. This whole setup was designed to force a confrontation, to make Cade responsible for whatever happened next. Cade walked forward slowly, ignoring the shouts from behind him telling him to stop. He holstered his gun deliberately, showing he wasn't armed, and approached the church. Samuel saw him coming and laughed, a broken sound that held no humor. "There he is, the hero of Ashwood, come to save the day again, Sheriff." Cade stopped at the church entrance, 10 feet from Samuel, and pulled out his notebook. He wrote quickly and held it up. "You wanted my attention. You have it. Let's talk." Samuel read it and laughed again. "Talk? You don't talk, Cade. You've never talked. 20 years of silence because you're too proud, too broken, too scared to let anyone hear your voice. But I heard your voice once. Remember? We were kids, and you screamed when you beat me. You found your voice through violence, just like I did. We're not so different, you and I." Cade shook his head and wrote, "We're nothing alike. You hurt innocent people for revenge. I protect them." Samuel's face twisted with rage. "Protect them? You destroyed my life. Everything I had, everything I built. You took it all. My father's empire, gone because you decided I was evil." Cade wrote, "You made yourself evil. You tried to assault Elizabeth when we were kids. You helped kill my father. You corrupted Owen. You shot innocent people at the festival. You tried to blow up children. Every choice was yours." Samuel read the words, and something in him seemed to crack. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat and dirt. "I didn't want to be this," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "When I was a boy, before everything went wrong, I wanted to be good. I wanted people to like me. But my father pushed and pushed, always demanding I be stronger, harder, more ruthless. And when you beat me in front of everyone, when you humiliated me, he looked at me like I was worthless. So I became what he wanted. Someone who never lost, who never showed weakness, who destroyed anyone who challenged me. And now look at me." He gestured at himself with his free hand, careful not to release the switch. "I'm a failure wearing dynamite, holding a church hostage, hated by an entire town. This is what your justice created, Cade. This is the monster you made." Cade stared at Samuel for a long moment, processing those words. Part of him wanted to reject them, to insist that Samuel's choices were his own, that no one made him into what he'd become. But another part, the part that had almost committed murder in that canyon, the part that understood how close anyone could come to crossing lines they never thought they'd cross, recognized a terrible truth. They'd created each other. Samuel's hatred had shaped Cade's vigilance, and Cade's incorruptibility had fueled Samuel's escalating violence. They were locked in a cycle that could only end one way, with one or both of them destroyed. Cade wrote slowly, carefully, "You're right, we shaped each other. But you still have a choice. Let go of that switch, surrender, face trial. You'll go to prison, but you'll be alive. Your sons will still have a father, even a flawed one. Break the cycle, Samuel. Choose different." Samuel read it and laughed bitterly. Prison? Living in a cage while everyone remembers me as the madman who tried to blow up a church? That's not life, that's torture. He paused, his finger wavering on the switch. "You know what? I'll make you a deal, Sheriff." Cade waited, his expression neutral. Samuel continued, "I'll surrender. I'll drop this switch gently so it doesn't explode. I'll let you arrest me and face whatever justice you think I deserve. But only if you do one thing." He smiled, and it was the cruelest expression Cade had ever seen. "You have to speak. Out loud. In front of this whole town. You have to use your voice and tell me I'm under arrest. Break your 20-year silence, Sheriff. Let everyone hear the voice you've been hiding all these years. Do that, and I surrender peacefully. Refuse, and we all go up in flames together." The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Behind Cade, he heard murmurs from the crowd, people processing what Samuel was demanding, understanding the weight of it. Cade had built his entire identity around his silence. It was his armor, his weapon, his way of surviving in a world that had taken everything from him. Samuel was asking him to strip that away, to expose the vulnerability he'd been protecting for 2 decades, to become someone he'd sworn never to be again. It was a brilliant final revenge. Force Cade to either die silent or live having broken the one promise he'd made to himself when his mother passed away. Cade stood there, frozen between 2 impossible choices, while the town held its breath and waited to see if their silent sheriff would finally speak. The silence stretched so long it became painful. People in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Children whispered questions to parents, and the sun beat down on the scene like judgment itself. Cade stared at Samuel, his mind racing through options. He could rush him, try to grab the switch before Samuel released it. But the distance was too great, and even if he moved faster than he'd ever moved, there wouldn't be time. He could shoot, try to disable Samuel's hand without killing him. But the risk was enormous, and failure meant everyone in blast range died. Or he could do what Samuel demanded. He could speak. The thought terrified him in ways that gunfights never had. His silence had become more than habit. It was identity protection, the last piece of the boy who'd lost everything. Speaking would mean letting go of that, becoming someone new, someone vulnerable in ways he couldn't predict. But as he looked at Samuel's desperate, hate-filled face, at the dynamite that could kill dozens, at Martha in the crowd with her hand over her mouth, Cade realized something profound. His silence, which had started as grief, had become pride. And pride was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. Cade took a deep breath. His throat felt tight, and used the forming words after 20 years of stillness. He opened his mouth, and at first, nothing came out, just air, shapeless and meaningless. Samuel's smile widened, thinking he'd won, thinking Cade couldn't do it. But then Cade tried again, and this time sound emerged. You. The word was rough, cracked, barely recognizable as speech. But it was a word. It was his voice. The crowd gasped collectively. Samuel's expression shifted from triumph to shock. Cade continued, each word coming easier than the last, his voice growing stronger, clearer, until it rang out across the space between them with surprising power. You are under arrest, Samuel Royce, for attempted murder, for assault, for terrorism, for every crime you committed against this town and its people. I am taking you into custody. Now, the words echoed in the sudden silence, and Cade realized with a start that his voice was deep, resonant. Nothing like he'd imagined it would sound. He'd expected something weak, broken. Instead, he heard strength, authority, the voice of someone who'd earned the right to command. Samuel stood frozen, the switch still in his hand, staring at Cade with an expression of complete disbelief. You actually did it, he whispered. After 20 years, you actually spoke. Something in his face crumbled then, the last vestiges of his defiance collapsing. I didn't think you would. I thought you'd let us all die rather than break your precious silence. But you did it. You actually did it. Tears streamed down his face now, and he looked suddenly infinitely tired. I don't want to die, Cade. I thought I did. But now that it's here, now that the moment is real, I don't want to die. His hand trembled on the switch. But I don't know how to surrender. I don't know how to stop being what I've become. How do I do it? How do I lay this down and not destroy everything? Cade took a step forward, his voice steady and calm now, like he'd been using it his whole life. Carefully, very carefully, you're going to hand me that switch, and I'm going to hold it while my deputies remove the dynamite. Then you're going to come with me, and we're going to walk to the jailhouse together. And Samuel, you're going to live. That's the hardest thing I can offer you. Not death, which would be easy, but life and the chance to make different choices with whatever time you have left. Samuel stared at him for a long moment, and then, moving with agonizing slowness, he extended his hand toward Cade. The switch came with it, and Cade's fingers wrapped around it carefully, feeling the mechanism, understanding that one wrong move would end everything. They stood like that for several heartbeats. Both men holding the switch, both committed to not letting go until it was safe. I'm sorry, Samuel whispered, so quietly only Cade could hear. For all of it, I'm sorry. Cade's response was equally quiet but firm. I know. Now let go. Samuel released the switch, and Cade held it steady. Finn and Garrett rushed forward, carefully cutting wires, removing the dynamite stick by stick, working with the focused intensity of men who knew one mistake would kill them all. 10 minutes later, the last piece of explosive was removed, carried away to be safely disposed of, and Samuel stood at the altar unarmed, crying, his hands raised in surrender. Cade approached him, speaking again, his voice carrying to the watching crowd. Samuel Royce, I'm placing you under arrest. You have a right to remain silent, which is a right I hope you exercise better than I did." There was a ripple of nervous laughter from the crowd. Cade continued, "You have a right to a fair trial, to legal representation, to be treated with dignity despite your crimes. I will ensure all of those rights are protected. Now come with me." Samuel nodded mutely and let himself be handcuffed. As they walked out of the church together, the crowd parted, people staring at them with expressions ranging from relief to shock to something approaching wonder. Martha pushed through to Cade, her eyes streaming with tears. "Your voice," she said. "All these years, and it's beautiful. It's strong." Cade met her gaze and smiled. Actually smiled, something the town had seen maybe 3 times in 8 years. "It's just a voice, Martha. I should have used it sooner." She shook her head. "You used it exactly when it mattered most. That's what makes you who you are." As Cade led Samuel toward the jailhouse, people began following, not threateningly but curiously, wanting to hear more of their sheriff's voice, wanted to witness this transformation. Someone called out, "Sheriff Merrick, what happens now?" Cade stopped and turned to face them all. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying. "Now Samuel faces trial for his crimes. Now we rebuild what's been damaged. Now Ashwood moves forward without fear. And now I do my job the way I should have been doing it all along. With words when they help, with silence when it's needed, and with justice tempered by mercy in all things. That's my promise to you." The crowd erupted in applause, and Cade felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Connection, community, the sense that he wasn't alone anymore. He locked Samuel in a cell, assigned his deputies to guard him, and walked out into the afternoon sun. His throat was sore from speaking, his emotions raw from the day's events. But for the first time in 20 years, Cade Merrick felt something close to complete. Samuel Royce's trial took place 2 months later, after the territorial governor sent a special prosecutor, and Judge Harding returned to oversee the proceedings. The evidence was overwhelming. The bomb at the school, the map of targets, the dynamite vest, dozens of witnesses. Samuel's lawyer tried to mount an insanity defense, arguing that his client had suffered a mental breakdown. And honestly, looking at Samuel in the courtroom, thin, age broken, it was hard to argue against that. But the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Catherine Wells, systematically dismantled the defense. "Mental illness doesn't excuse planning multiple murders," she argued. Samuel Royce knew exactly what he was doing. He chose every step. He chose violence over surrender, revenge over redemption, hatred over healing. That's not insanity. That's evil. The jury listened intently, and when it was time for testimony, Cade took the stand. It was surreal hearing his own voice echo through the courtroom, answering questions, explaining his investigation, describing the confrontation at the church. People who'd known him for years stared as if seeing him for the first time. His voice was clear, measured, authoritative. The voice of someone who'd spent years observing, thinking, processing. He made an effective witness. But the most dramatic moment came when Samuel himself took the stand. Against his lawyer's advice, he insisted on testifying. He walked to the witness box slowly, sat down, and looked directly at the jury. "I'm guilty," he said simply, "of all of it. Everything they've accused me of, and probably more they don't know about. I planned to murder children. I tried to destroy a church. I spent years corrupting law enforcement and terrorizing this town. I did all of that, and I did it because I was consumed by hatred for one man." He pointed at Cade. "Sheriff Merrick beat me when I was 16 for trying to assault a girl. I deserved that beating. But instead of learning from it, I let it define me. I let that humiliation become the core of my identity. And I spent 17 years trying to destroy him, because I couldn't destroy the memory of my own shame. The courtroom was silent. Samuel continued, tears streaming down his face. But here's what I learned standing in that church with dynamite strapped to my chest. Cade Merrick didn't make me evil. I made myself evil. Every choice was mine. And when he spoke to save my life and everyone else's, when he gave me mercy I absolutely didn't deserve, he showed me what I could have been if I'd chosen different. So I'm pleading guilty. I'm asking for no mercy, no reduced sentence. I'm asking to be held fully accountable for every terrible thing I've done. The jury convicted him on all counts. Judge Harding sentenced him to life in prison, without possibility of parole. As the marshal led Samuel away in chains, he paused at Cade's table and spoke quietly. "Thank you for not killing me. Thank you for believing I was worth saving. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to prove you right." Cade met his eyes and spoke clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "Spend your life being better than you were. That's all any of us can do." Samuel nodded and was led away. The trial ended, and Ashwood finally exhaled, feeling like a weight that pressed down for years had finally lifted. That evening, the town organized a celebration at Martha's insistence. Not celebrating Samuel's conviction, but celebrating survival resilience, the fact that their community had weathered the storm together. Cade attended reluctantly, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. But people wanted to talk to him, wanted to hear his voice, wanted to thank him for everything he'd done. He spoke to each person who approached, finding it easier with each conversation, discovering that words weren't as dangerous as he'd feared. They were just tools, like his guns, to be used carefully and with purpose. Late in the evening, Martha found him sitting alone on the church steps, looking up at the stars. She sat beside him, comfortable in the silence that fell between them. After a while, she spoke. "Are you glad you found your voice again?" Cade considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said finally, "and no. The silence served me for a long time. It taught me to listen, to observe, to think before acting. I don't regret those 20 years, but I regret what it cost, the distance it created, the connections I didn't make, the ways it isolated me from people who cared about me. Like you." He turned to look at her. "You've been my friend since I was 12 years old, Martha. You stood by me through everything. And I never told you how much that meant, how much you mean." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "I always knew, Cade. Your silence was never really silent to me. I could hear everything you weren't saying." Cade smiled. "Still, it's good to say it now. Thank you for everything. For never giving up on the broken boy who couldn't speak. For helping him become a man who finally can." They sat together in companionable quiet as the celebration continued around them. Inside the church, someone started playing piano, and people began singing old hymns and folk songs, the music of a community that had survived something terrible and come out stronger. Cade listened to the voices rising together and realized something profound. His silence had been about control, about protecting himself from pain by refusing to engage fully with the world. But real strength wasn't about control. It was about vulnerability, about risking pain for the possibility of connection, about speaking even when it scared you, because words could heal as well as harm. He'd learned that lesson late, but he'd learned it. And tomorrow, when he woke up and put on his badge, he'd be a different sheriff than he'd been yesterday. Still dedicated, still just, still willing to stand between danger and innocence. But now he'd do it with a voice, Now he'd do it connected to his community in ways he'd never allowed himself before. Marcus Thorne would have been proud. His mother would have been proud. And maybe, finally, Cade could be proud of himself too. Not for the violence he'd committed or the criminals he'd stopped, but for the choice he'd made in the church to break his own prison, to risk himself or others, to prove that change was possible even for someone who'd spent 20 years locked in silence. Tomorrow was a new beginning. Tonight, he'd sit with his friend and listen to his town sing. Finally at peace. 5 years passed. The railroad came to Ashwood as promised, and the town tripled in size, sprawling out into the prairie with new buildings, new businesses, new families seeking opportunity. Cade Merrick remained sheriff throughout it all, but he was a different sheriff than the silent guardian he'd once been. He spoke regularly now, giving speeches at town meetings, teaching classes on law and justice at Martha's school, mentoring young lawmen who came from across the territory to learn from the legendary sheriff who'd built peace from chaos. His deputies, Finn and Garrett, had grown into excellent lawmen themselves, handling most day-to-day operations while Cade focused on larger territorial issues. Crime remained low in Ashwood. The town had built a reputation as a place where justice was fair, swift, and certain, where criminals were caught and prosecuted, but also where mercy was extended to those who genuinely sought redemption. It was a balance Marcus Thorne had always preached, finally achieved. Samuel Royce sat in his prison cell 500 miles away, and surprisingly, he'd kept his word. He'd written to Cade regularly, letters that started as apologies and evolved into philosophical discussions about justice, revenge, and the possibility of redemption. He'd become something of a prison chaplain, counseling other inmates, helping them process their own hatred and violence. His sons visited him twice a year, conversations that were painful but healing, slowly rebuilding relationships that Samuel's crimes had shattered. In one letter, Samuel wrote, "I think about that day in the church constantly. The moment you spoke was the moment I finally heard something other than my own rage. Your voice saved my life, but more importantly, it saved my soul. I'll never be free again, and I shouldn't be. But I'm more free in this cell, working to help others, than I ever was outside consumed by hatred. Thank you for showing me that possibility." Cade read that letter and felt something he'd never expected: forgiveness. Not forgetting, not excusing, but genuine forgiveness for the man who tried so hard to destroy him. It felt like laying down a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. Martha married that year, a widower rancher named Thomas who'd lost his wife in the festival shooting and found comfort in Martha's strength and wisdom. Cade stood as best man at their wedding, giving a speech that had people laughing and crying in equal measure. Martha Grimshaw taught a silent boy that words weren't everything, he said. His voice wore with affection and amusement. Then she spent 20 years waiting patiently for him to learn that words were still something. She's the most stubborn, most patient, most fundamentally good person I've ever known. Thomas, you're the luckiest man alive. And if you ever forget that, you'll answer to me. The crowd laughed, and Thomas promised solemnly that he'd treasure her always. After the wedding, as Cade was preparing to leave the celebration, Martha pulled him aside. "I have something to tell you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Thomas and I are leaving Ashwood. He's at a ranch in Wyoming that needs attention, and I've been teaching here for 30 years. It's time for new adventures." Cade felt a pang of loss, but he smiled. "You've earned your adventures, and I'll visit. I promise." 2 years after that, Cade himself finally allowed room for something beyond duty. Her name was Elizabeth. Yes, the same Elizabeth he'd saved from Samuel when they were teenagers. now a widow with grown children of her own, returned to Ashwood after years away. They'd had coffee, then dinner, then long conversations where Cade discovered that using his voice for something other than work felt surprisingly natural. They married quietly, without fanfare, and Elizabeth moved into the room above the jailhouse that Cade had occupied alone for so many years. She brought warmth, humor, and a practical wisdom that balanced Cade's intensity. "You saved me when we were kids," she told him one evening. "Now I get to save you from yourself, from the part that still wants to carry everything alone." Cade had laughed, really laughed, and pulled her close. "I think we save each other," he said. "That's how this is supposed to work." She'd agreed, and they'd built a life together that was quiet, peaceful, and deeply happy. On the 10th anniversary of the church confrontation, the town erected a monument in the center square, a bronze statue of Sheriff Cade Merrick, not in a dramatic pose, but simply standing with his hand resting on his badge, looking out over the town. The inscription read, "A sheriff's silence that changed the town forever. Cade Merrick, who protected Ashwood with justice, mercy, and the courage to find his voice when it mattered most." At the unveiling ceremony, the mayor asked Cade to speak. He stood before the gathered crowd, a town that had grown from a frontier outpost to a thriving community, and felt the weight of all those years, all those choices, all those moments of silence and sound. "I did want to speak today," he began, and people chuckled because they knew him well enough now to recognize his dry humor. "But then I remembered something Marcus Thorne once told me. Justice and mercy both matter. That truth guided my silence, and it guided my decision to break that silence. This town taught me that you don't have to be perfect to be good. You just have to keep trying, keep learning, keep choosing the harder right over the easier wrong." He paused, looking at the faces before him. Friends, neighbors, people he protected and who protected him in return. "Thank you for giving me a home. Thank you for trusting me even when I couldn't speak. And thank you for accepting me when I finally could. This town changed me as much as I changed it, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." The applause was thunderous. That night, as Cade and Elizabeth walked home under a sky full of stars, she asked him if he ever missed the silence. Cade thought about it carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Silence taught me things words never could. But words let me connect with people in ways silence never allowed. I think the real lesson is that both have value, both have purpose. Knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet. That's the wisdom I'm still learning." Elizabeth squeezed his hand. "You're doing fine, Sheriff Merrick. More than fine." As they reached the jailhouse, Cade looked back at the town. Lights glowing in windows, the distant sound of laughter from the saloon, the peaceful quiet of a community at rest. He thought about the boy he'd been, struck mute by grief and loss. He thought about the young man who'd turned silence into armor. He thought about the sheriff who'd almost become a murderer in a canyon, saved only by children's laughter. And he thought about the man he was now, imperfect, scarred, but finally complete. 23 years after his mother's death took his voice, Cade Merrick had learned the most important truth. Silence and speech weren't opposites. They were partners, each necessary, each powerful in its own way. His silence had changed Ashwood by teaching people that action spoke louder than words, that integrity didn't need to be proclaimed, that justice could be pursued without fanfare. His voice had changed Ashwood by showing people that even the most broken among them could heal, that vulnerability was strength, that words spoken at the right moment could save lives and souls. The silent sheriff's greatest legacy wasn't his arrest record or his reputation. It was a lesson he'd taught his town. That change was always possible, that redemption was always available to those who genuinely sought it, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was speak when everyone expected silence, or stay silent when everyone expected words. As Cade climbed the stairs to his home, where Elizabeth waited with a warm meal and warmer smile, he smiled to himself. Marcus Thorne had been right all along. Justice and mercy both mattered. And Cade Merrick, the boy who couldn't speak and became the sheriff who wouldn't, had finally learned to balance both with his voice and his silence, saving not just his town but himself in the process. The end was really a beginning, and the silence had changed everything had, in breaking, changed everything once more, for the better, for always, forever. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. And don't forget, drop a comment below telling me what you learned from the whole story. Your engagement helps this channel grow and brings more stories to life. Until next time, remember, fortune favors the bold, but legacy favors the wise.